When people leave this conversation, I really hope that they feel more educated, more empowered, and like, okay, yeah, but what do I do?
I think you almost have to put your detective hat on and say, okay, what can I learn about this house? What can I learn about this neighborhood? What are the potential risks in this neighborhood? And that can be anything from knowing where the water sources are. Is there a dam upstream from my house? Is there a creek half a mile away that if there's major rain, that creek's going to turn into a raging river? What construction projects are going on? How's the drainage? A lot of people never go visit that house on a rainy day.
There comes a time, somewhere after 50, when you realize home isn't just about where you live. It's about how you live. It's about who you're becoming and what you're ready to make space for. I'm Juli Ford, real estate expert and longtime wellness coach, and someone who's lived in a multi-generational home for the past decade while reinventing my life and my business. And this is Home After 50, a podcast about what it really means to find, shape, and come home to a new season, to a new home, to a new version of yourself. Whether you're thinking about upsizing, downsizing, moving in with family, or just asking bigger questions about what's next, you're in the right place. Each episode, I will share stories, insights, and real strategies for women redefining home and life on their own terms. Because after 50, home isn't just a place, it's a calling. And this time, it's yours. Welcome back to Home After 50. My guest today is George Siegal of Move the World Films. George is a documentary filmmaker, a former TV journalist, and a father. And he has produced a film called Built to Last, Buyer Beware, that I think is a really important film. And I think you will gain a lot out of both this conversation and then perhaps following the podcast episode if you're interested by renting the film as well. George is really dedicated to helping people make smarter and safer decisions about where they live. And he also shares some tools with us, a downloadable tool, which I'll link at the end of the episode and in the show notes, as well as access to rent the film if after listening to the episode you would like to learn more. I will say before we start, the film itself centers a great deal on Florida and particular damage from some particular storms in the area in which George lives. But after speaking with him, after watching the film, I realized how applicable this is to almost anyone, no matter where you live. So it was a fun conversation. I know you're going to enjoy listening to George as a speaker. I really enjoyed speaking with him. So let's dive into the episode. George, welcome to Home After 50.
Hey, Julie, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad that you're here. When you reached out to me, I knew right away that the topic that you have made your film about is something that could be really relevant to my audience. And since we've last talked, I've actually watched your film, so I'm really excited to talk to you more about it today. But before we get into it, maybe just share with me a little bit about what really caused you to make the film and what really you're interested in getting out there in terms of a message to people who are buying homes.
Absolutely. You know, disasters have been a part of my career, both positively and negatively. But I was in the TV news business for a number of years as a weatherman, as a reporter, and I would cover disasters. And you would go out and interview people who lost everything in a fire, in a flood, in a hurricane, in a tornado. And it was just awful to hear their stories and hear how their lives are upended and sometimes forever based on that disaster. So when I got out of the news business and I started my own production company, I said, I want to make a film about this. And so after Hurricane Michael, I made a film called The Last House Standing that talked about some houses that survived and what you need to do to survive. And then I thought, well, what about Built to Last? Because that should be the goal when a home is built. It should be built to last. It shouldn't be built to be rebuilt. That would be the title if we wanted to have a negative spin on this film.
Built to be rebuilt. Yeah, no one wants that.
Built to Last, Buyer Beware is a wake-up call for everybody of all the things you need to pay attention to when you're buying a house. And that's one of the things, we had talked about previously, that for all your listeners, we're going to give them a link in the show notes where they can go and download a document that I created. It's just 6 or 7 questions that you absolutely should ask the builder or the person you're buying a house from, because it will give you valuable information that you need to know about that could make a difference between buying a safe house and getting a house that's not safe. And we're also going to put the link in where people can rent my film, the long version of the film, not the version that's on public television. So it's a little longer. But I think people will find it very interesting. And although my film deals with hurricanes, a disaster is a disaster. And I can say that covering them all over the country, that whether it's a fire or an earthquake or a flood, victims are victims.
Yeah.
And the recovery is just as difficult from every disaster I've ever heard of. And we want to help people avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up. So one of the things when you and I first started talking, I had two sort of concerns. One was that the film is a little bit, based on hurricanes, and that's, maybe a particular part of the country. But I realized from after watching the film and then after talking with you that really the lessons learned from all of that can really be applied to anyone, anywhere. And even more importantly than that, I remember I said this to you the first time that we talked. I didn't want this conversation to just be about scaring people about what is, what could potentially be a disaster for them in a home purchase. But I also wanted to be able to offer solutions to that. And this document that you've offered to share, I think is going to be really helpful. Just like when people leave this conversation, I really hope that they feel more educated, more empowered, and like, okay, yeah, but what do I do? Like, how do I avoid being the one that gets affected by these disasters in a way I can't recover from?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we talked about. It's like you don't want to scare everybody that's listening, but to be honest with you, patting somebody on the back or holding their hand and just saying, "Oh, you need to be careful," that doesn't really get very many people's attention.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to scare people a little bit. And what I've found is the people that are most likely to make a change, sadly, are the ones that have been affected by the disaster. And the person who lives right next door to them that has nothing happen to them just goes on with their lives like nothing happened. And to me, a great example is I'm on my cell phone driving down the street and I almost run into somebody and my heart's racing fast. And I go, oh my God, my whole life could have been ruined if I had hit that person. I'm never using my phone again in the car. And then 2 blocks later, I'm over it and I'm picking up my phone again. And I think that's the way people are with disasters. If it doesn't hit them, they're not worried about it. And no matter where you live on the East Coast, a hurricane in Florida could be your disaster with flooding, with winds.
Yeah.
With
as we found out in North Carolina.
Yeah. It
Not
happens.
too long ago. Yeah, it does. But I think you're right. I think it's human nature, right? Like if we haven't experienced it ourselves, it's kind of easy to put our blinders on. And I know I shared with you. So, you're based in Florida. The film is largely about Florida, but, just turn on the news or live anywhere in the country now. And you could be in North Carolina with flooding from a hurricane, or you could be in California with wildfires. Or like I shared with you, this is not a natural disaster, but something that we just found out about recently in Massachusetts. We have crumbling foundations. And that's an enormous issue here in Massachusetts that homeowners are not protected from, and nobody saw it coming. So, yeah.
That's frightening. When you sent me some articles about that, and I'm reading that because I'm a big proponent of concrete as being one of the safest structures. But everything has its risks when you're using any kind of material for anything. There can always be a problem. Unfortunately, that's an expensive fix for a lot of people, and I certainly wish them the best and hope that Massachusetts can get a handle on it because it's a major problem. And, when you talk about disasters, if you just had victims from every part of the country and they didn't say what the disaster was, but they just talked about what their life was like recovering, you're going to hear the same theme in every story. They're displaced. It's cost them way too much money. They lost things that they'll never recover. Their lives are upended. I mean, it doesn't matter the disaster because it's tragic no matter where you are. And so I think the film does stand up wherever you are. You just can't, you can't look at it and go, oh, I don't have hurricanes. That's not a problem.
Right.
Well, you sure do have wildfires. You sure do. Now you have that concrete problem.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer would have been to avoid that. I mean, they obviously missed it on slab.
On so many
inspections.
levels. Yeah, on so many levels. Yeah. I know when you said that about the recovery, I remember, I think in your film, one of the people that you interviewed had said it took them 7 years to fully get back, either to get back into their home or just like to financially recover. I'm sure there were lifetime effects from that, but it doesn't seem like a quick resolution when you've been affected by something like this.
No, that was a gentleman named Doug Quinn, and his story is just heartbreaking because it took 7 years. He was living in his car for 30 days with his daughter, and he ran into so many problems that it led him to start an organization to help people that are going through that problem.
Yeah.
And we talk about that in the film as well. it's unbelievable what it can be like once you become a victim, because then fate is kind of out of your hands and you're relying on people coming in to fix the problem. Are there enough workers? You know, if just your house is damaged, you might be able to get the best guy in town, best lady in town to come fix it. But if every house on your block is wiped out and there's 3,000 houses that have been destroyed, good luck getting the top-notch person, and now you have to find somebody to do it. And will your insurance cover anything? How quickly will they pay you? Where are you living in the meantime? Where are your kids going to school? I mean, I could go on, but the fact is, it took him 7 years, and it's changed his life to where his life's work is now trying to help other people overcome that.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's admirable that
Yeah.
he's turning that into a way to help. I want to back up a little bit and say that the reason that I wanted to have you on the podcast was because most people who listen to this podcast, most people who encounter me on social media or wherever are thinking about a move. And many of them are thinking about multi-generational moves where they're either building out ADUs, accessory dwelling units on their homes or in their yards, or combining resources with family to buy a new home. And there are also many people building new homes to support multi-generational living, and there are many builders across the country. And I hear varying reports on the reputable nature of those builders or the quality of the teams that they're hiring on the ground. So I do think that what you have to share and what's in the film really is applicable to most people who are following along here.
Yeah, and there's a lot people can do when they're looking at a property, because what happens in a lot of cases is your realtor will show you a house,
Yeah.
and they're showing you what's available in the market, based on what you've told them you're looking for. But then how much do you really, as the buyer, look into the person who built that house,
Right.
and what the history is of that house? And if it's new construction, the builder will give you a list of references, usually of happy customers. And that's not the list I want, because the friends and family and people that love me list is great. I want to hear from the people who don't like me so much, and how did I handle problems that came up? Because construction's not a perfect business. There are going to be problems, but how do they handle them? And a buddy of mine was telling me about a builder he was looking at in San Antonio, Texas, that had a lot of negative comments. And I said, well, how did the builder respond to those?
Yes.
Because sometimes things go wrong, and the builder can say, yeah, but we were aware of that, and I'm sending somebody out to take care of it, and we're sorry that. But you usually don't see much response to those things. So I think you almost have to put your detective hat on and say, okay, what can I learn about this house? What can I learn about this neighborhood? What are the potential risks in this neighborhood? And that can be anything from knowing where the water sources are. Is there a dam upstream from my house? Is there a creek half a mile away that if there's major rain, that creek's going to turn into a raging river?
Yeah.
What construction projects are going on? How's the drainage? A lot of people never go visit that house on a rainy day. I live in South Tampa, Florida, where there are houses, not that I live in, but in my neighborhood, that are $7, $8, $9 million right on the water. Every time it rains, there's a lake on the street in front of some of these houses. The street doesn't drain. They probably never saw that on a rainy day. How would they even know that? And that's a problem, because if you live in a humid area with mosquitoes, just water splashing on you if you're out in your yard with cars driving by. And then what's the neighborhood like where you live? And by walking around and talking to people, you can get a lot of information. It's hard if you're a relocation person. You're taking someone around
because
who's
you're
there
not
for
there
Wednesday,
so much.
Thursday.
Yeah.
And so nobody's home. Everybody's working. They can't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
I encourage people to try to go on a Saturday or a Sunday on their own. They don't
When
have to
people
take
are
up
around.
the
Yeah.
realtor's time. When people are around, and
Yep.
talk to people.
It's funny
and
that
ask
you said
questions.
that. It's funny that you said that, because there was a house in my neighborhood that had some flooding problems. And it actually, the backstory of that was it happened before we moved here, but some construction happened behind that house after that house was built that created some water runoff that had never existed before, and caused a huge flooding problem for this home. And then that house was flipped by a builder. And I wasn't confident that the way that they had done it was going to fully address the issues with the water in the house. And when the house went under agreement, the parents, this is just such a funny thing, but they were so smart. The parents of the people buying it rode down the street, and people were outside and they talked to us. And I said, before your kids buy the house, please look into the water issue and have an expert come and talk to you about this, because I know historically it's been a problem, and I'm not entirely sure it's been addressed. And so they at least went in eyes wide open. But guess what? It wasn't great. And I did what I could to help them
Hey,
figure it out.
yeah, good for you trying. You know, when we were shooting our film, we were shooting in a lot where there was a house next door, and this woman was standing there staring at us, and she looked really angry. And so we took a break, and I went over and said, "Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay?" And she said, "See that lot across the street from me where those apartments are? That used to be green space, and now there's a huge apartment complex there, and every time it rains, my house floods. Nobody from the city will take my calls. Nobody is helping me." And so that's a thought that doesn't usually extend beyond the property where they've done the building, unless it's a community that thinks about those kind of
Right,
things.
right.
So you want to know if they do. When they're building out and changing things and taking away green spaces, what was the plan for where that water's going to go?
Yeah.
Because you don't want it in your house.
Right, absolutely. And I think, I am a real estate agent. That's part of what I do. And when I'm supporting buyers, consider that to be a big part, just this investigation and really trying to understand what's happening. But even still, right, even being in the field, we can't know every single thing about every neighborhood and every house that we bring our clients to. So you've said some things already, but let's talk really practical, because honestly, it could be overwhelming, right? Especially if I'm relocating from across the country, if I'm not around there a lot, or even if I'm nearby, it still feels overwhelming. Like a dam, George, how am I going to know if there's a dam up the street? What do I do?
Well, you can look on flood. There's government flood maps
Yep.
that you can look at to see if there's a flood zone
Yeah.
where you live and what the rating is. A lot of the realtor sites now are giving risk ratings
Yes.
on certain properties. And, my sister's a realtor, and I always tell people, you guys aren't responsible for doing all of that. That's not I ultimately blame myself if I make a mistake in a purchase, because I should have known. When we looked at our house, it was a tree-lined street, and we loved that. We thought it was so spectacular. And when we actually moved in, every tree was gone because they cut them down to do a sewer project on the street. Now, I know people knew about that, but I could have found out about it.
Yeah.
I could have called the city and said, "Hey, this is the house I'm looking at. Are there any projects coming up on this street? What's going on?" So yes, on the surface, it's overwhelming if you look at everything that you have to do. But if you're sitting in your house in Cleveland because you're moving to Boston or anywhere in Massachusetts, go online, look around, see what's in that area, see areas that get good reviews and good ratings. Obviously, schools are important. Is there a good school there? But it's also important to know, around here, are there sinkholes? Are there other hazards that have happened in the past historically? And what's the projections for the future for that community? What's the infrastructure? Are they going to have to? And I know it doesn't sound like a fun thing to do, but the opposite of not doing it isn't very much fun either.
You're making me think of a couple of things. One is even just news articles, right? And weather reports. So I live in a place, our town is not coastal, but we live right next door to a couple of coastal towns, and some of them flood. 2-3 towns here have notorious neighborhoods that are feet underwater when we have, high tides and storms. So I think even looking at weather reports online, luckily we have so much video available to us now. Do you really want to live in a place that gets 3 feet of water twice a year?
No. And you know what? I was on a podcast yesterday, and they asked me about lake flooding. They go, "We have a lot of lakes around here. Do people living on lakes have to worry about it?" And I said, "Well, I've seen a lot of videos where there's a drought and all of a sudden the water goes way down. And then I've seen a lot of videos where there's a lot of rain and there's a dam that created that lake. And now that dam could break. And if it does, where's all that water going to go?" So I said, just having a lake doesn't give you a pass on what might happen. The coast is always going to be perilous for people living there. And in our film, they flat out say, don't live by the coast.
It's so that I loved that part of your film, because I frequently think about that. We all love the ocean, right? And I would never, after watching what's happened in the towns near me when there's storms, I always say people are crazy. I would never buy that close to the water. I would never be able to live with that level of risk and uncertainty. You have to know yourself. I don't know how some people can. But one of the things I loved was one of your experts in the film said, coasts were never made to be permanent. The earth is not permanent the way that it's designed. There is erosion. These coastlines are going to change.
Yeah. And there's people that'll argue with you if you want to discuss climate change or you want to discuss sea level rise, and then it becomes all kinds of baloney arguing back and forth. The fact is, we're building in places where we're encroaching on Mother Nature, and then we seem shocked when bad things happen. We build on a barrier island, but we go, oh, God, I never thought that would flood. Or, I live in the area that I live in. We had 2 hurricanes in a row, 2 hurricane seasons ago, back to back, and it pretty much wiped out all the one-story houses, and water was 4 feet away from my front door. Now, there's not a more helpless feeling in the world than watching water rise, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's a very helpless feeling. And so we should have lived someplace with higher elevation. My partner in the film says everybody should be at least 35 feet. Now, that's not realistic in Florida, but there are places that are that high. We talk about a neighborhood in there that that was built specifically to avoid bad weather and disasters, and it actually did do well in a hurricane. So the idea is make better choices. You have the choice. It's great. Yeah, I love living near the ocean or near the bay. It's beautiful, but there's a huge risk, and is it worth it to you?
Yeah, I would rather rent or visit, to be honest, than own. I loved that community that was featured in your film. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, I don't remember the name of it, but I think it was like 35 miles inland, wasn't it?
It's 17 miles, but it was 35 feet elevation. It's Babcock Ranch.
Yeah.
And I found them on 60 Minutes. They were featured on there after Hurricane Ian and how well they did. Now, that elevation and not being right by the water helped because we were down in Fort Myers Beach where they got wiped out. A lot of places were destroyed, and you saw what happened to a family that lived there. So having that elevation is huge, and they have a lot of water on their property, but they have a system for draining it when there's going to be flooding. So they know to release water so it's not a problem. And that was a huge hurricane. I mean, that was a Category 4, and they held up really well. It was a great testament to thinking about what could happen and then seeing it actually work.
I loved their perspective on it too, because whoever was the spokesperson that you had in the film for that community was sharing that people, communities all over the country reach out to them for like, hey, what did you do? And how can we repeat that here? And they seem to have a very generous spirit about saying, hey, our only goal is like we'll share our information with you. We just want communities to not suffer through the consequences of these events and these risks.
Oh, that guy's terrific. And his philosophy is fantastic because why would you want to be the only neighborhood? It's not like everybody can live in your community. If you have knowledge that can make people safer, I think that's something worth sharing.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about the film. I want people to see it because there's knowledge there that can help you avoid life-altering problems. And his attitude was fantastic, and they've done a great job there.
That's wonderful. So I want to talk about insurance for a minute, but before we get to insurance, I did have another thought about research that people can do. So we've talked about, researching online. We've talked about talking to neighbors, walking a neighborhood, which I think is probably the smartest thing that you can do. I had another thought though, and it depends on which community you're moving into, but many, many communities have Facebook groups that are, and they can be any kind of community groups, but quite often they're Facebook groups that are great sources of information. Now, they also can be home for a bunch of complainers and negative Nancys, but I know when we moved into our house and our community, that group was like where we found our landscapers or where we found somebody to do the driveway. And you get a lot of real information from real people living in a community. So maybe some online research for community groups could be helpful too.
Yeah, some of those are closed groups where you can't really see the comments or get too involved if you don't actually prove to them that you live there. But Nextdoor is usually pretty available where you can see certain things. And it's certainly worth looking. Anywhere you can look and ask, and then call the local floodplain manager in that community and ask them questions. Call down to the city and ask for the planning person. There's got to be people that on a lot of days are just sitting there doing their job and would love to help people. You don't get in a job like that, I believe, if you don't care about helping people, especially floodplain managers. I'd never even heard of them. And I've been to 3 of their conventions now and met a lot of these people. And they're some of the most caring, conscientious people I've ever met. I wish I had called my local floodplain manager. Maybe I would have bought in an area that water wouldn't come 4 feet from my front door.
And do you find those through the town or the local municipality?
Yeah, you would look in on the community website. Like for here, it would be the city of Tampa, and then you would call down there, and if they're not listed on there specifically, call and ask for them based on the entity that's in charge of that area, and
Okay.
find out whose job that is, and ask some questions. Because the more information you have, the better choice you're going to make.
Yeah. Just a note about those community groups. You're right. Some of them often are closed. Some of them, I know in our local area, they do allow people in who are considering moving or relocating to the community. A lot of those groups, by the way, are run by realtors who got smart, like a little bit ahead of the curve and created these groups. So they don't let any other realtors in, which is fine. They have a lot of community members in them, but sometimes because of that, they actually might be very likely to let you in the group because they'd love to represent you as a real estate agent when you get there, but you still get access to the community. So it's worth asking, like trying to
Yeah,
join and sending a message.
absolutely. And you know what? Realtors, I think, somebody said to me, realtors aren't going to like my film. I don't think we think of realtors as the problem. Realtors love educated clients
Yeah,
that know
I
what they
agree.
want, that are actually going to help out in the process. You
Yeah.
can't be everybody's everything.
Yeah, it's
You
true.
you have too many things to do. So the smarter people are, and the more knowledge they come to the table with, the better experience it's going to be for everybody.
I agree completely. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of experiences, good or bad, let's talk about insurance
Yeah.
because this
Wow.
comes up a lot in the film. So I'd like to just like open the floor to insurance and you tell me what you learned through this film process about the insurance industry or what people need to understand.
Yeah, when I came into this with an open mind, I didn't come to the table to make this film with an objective of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. But if
Yeah.
you watch the film, clearly the one of the biggest bad guys, the big bad wolf, is the insurance industry
Yeah.
because they are such a huge entity overall of insurance, and their goal overall, and this has been stated in lawsuits and documents, it was on 60 Minutes and other news programs, is their goal is not to pay your claim.
Yeah.
The idea is if they don't have to pay it or they can take as long as they can possibly take to pay it, then a lot of people go away. A lot of people give up.
Yeah.
And in places like Florida, have a huge lobbying industry, like I imagine they do in most states, and they've changed the laws to where it's not very favorable for the homeowner. So if I have to sue my insurance company and I win, I don't get attorney's fees anymore. So now little old me is going up against Goliath there, who's got thousands of lawyers on staff, and I may have to find one that's going to help me. And so when I end up owing them $70 or $80,000, I'm not going to have enough money to fix my house
Yeah.
if I win, if I can outlast them and win. And I just wish they had a better attitude. And I know there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of people that try to take advantage of them. But I'm talking about for victims, and we show victims in our film, and then the stories I've heard of other victims beyond our film. It's life altering when you're working with an adjuster and they're working on your claim, and right about the time where you're going to get paid, they switch adjusters and they start over.
Oh,
Or as you saw on 60 Minutes, and I keep talking about them, I'm not an overall fan of the show, but they've had a few very relevant stories to what I'm doing.
yeah.
That story they had about the adjuster fraud, where the adjuster would turn his work into the company, and then the homeowner would go to make their claim, and the company would change it and lower it. And so the adjuster became a whistleblower against his company and exposed that. And there's so many examples. In Florida, there's an 800 number that they set up that you're supposed to call for insurance fraud. When we were making our film, I called that number many times, telling them who I was and what I wanted to get from them, and nobody ever called me back.
And
And
also, I think it came up in the film that that's a nightmare if you're in the middle of a natural disaster. I mean, it's a different story if you have a one-off insurance issue with your house and there's a number you're supposed to call. But if thousands of people are affected by an event and they're all trying to call this number, I think you featured that in the film, right? Like people couldn't even get through.
they couldn't get through. And I don't want to be unfair to the industry and say that does happen. It
Yeah.
happens in a lot of instances where a website gets flooded or a number gets inundated with people calling because it's an emergency. And emergencies change the dynamic of everything. We showed this example in the film that if you're in a car accident, insurance works great if it's one or two cars, your company against their company. But all of a sudden, there's a 500 car pileup on a foggy day, and or a whole neighborhood gets wiped out, it changes the dynamic when it's on a larger scale.
Of course.
We see that with wildfires. You know, if I go out to put a fire out on my house, I get pretty good water pressure. If the whole neighborhood's burning, it's going to come dripping out. Very small, very little water's coming out of that hose.
Yeah.
And that's the way disasters are. They change the dynamic of how you can handle it. So insurance has a tougher time dealing with those things. And I think that a lot of the regulations favor them. And I wish they did a better job at what they do. I've just heard too many stories of where they don't. It costs a ridiculous amount of money now to have insurance. A lot of people get canceled before hurricane season or before fire season. There's people in California right now. I grew up in Pacific Palisades. You probably followed.
Oh,
the
you did?
fires.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up. Sad what happened to them. It's just tragic. And when you see the trouble people are having there and just being able to rebuild. Now, I don't know if you could put that all on insurance. A lot of that's on permitting and other
So many
issues.
other issues, yeah.
But when you have a legacy house where your family might have owned it, maybe they paid $50,000 for it back in the 50s. Now that's a $2 million lot or a $3 million lot. Now you got to put a house on it. You know, how do you rebuild? How do you go on with that? Insurance can't be responsible for that.
Right.
So it's very difficult. But the experience, and you have to watch the film and see the philosophy that you feel you're getting from the insurance industry, especially in Florida, where you have to have flood insurance and then you have to be insured for wind.
I want to talk about that because in the film, there was this example of like there would be if I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but there would be one adjuster for the flood insurance and one adjuster for the wind insurance. And then there was someone, I think it was a woman in the film who was using this example of like, oh, if they're at the property at the same time, they can talk about it. And then someone else was like, that is never going to happen. Like it's never going to happen that it's easy to get all those pieces to come together.
That was a very big moment in the film, and she's a wonderful woman, by the way. She's just very pro insurance industry. That's her
Yeah.
field, and so she believes in what they do and will stand up for it. But the fact of getting two adjusters there at the same time and having them agree, because what you hear a lot about here in Florida is they fight over it to see who is going to pay.
Well, of course,
if I can make you pay, why
to
am
be
I?
the other company, right?
Yeah. Right. So that happens a lot. So then you have to get an engineer involved to determine what happens. In one of the hurricanes we had here a few years ago, we had 21 inches of rain. The storm drains in a neighborhood that wasn't a flood zone backed up. Water got into people's houses. Was that from wind knocking things down that blocked the storm drain?
Oh, gosh.
Or was it from water that just was too much water and it got in your house? Man, if you're relying on that decision, that could be a long wait.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because when you mentioned earlier about looking at the flood maps, I do that for every client that I ever work with is looking to buy a house. We always check the FEMA flood maps. But some of those are more updated than others, right? And then in some cases, we can't kind of predict the future. So it is one guide, but it's not completely foolproof, right?
A lot of those maps are older.
Yeah.
And, FEMA gets a terrible rap, right? With the stuff you hear about them. I've met so many people that work there in making my film, and they're some of the nicest people that I've met. And when you're the ones responding to a disaster and going into a community when everybody is so needy, who's going to be happy with that?
Right.
So you're getting people on their worst day.
Yeah.
So in a sense, they get a bad rap in a lot of situations, but a lot of the data that they put out probably needs to be updated.
Yeah.
Because the flood map, you want to know current. I mean, if you know what happened 40 years ago, that doesn't help you today.
Right.
And we see that in a lot of things with building codes, for example. That's another thing we talk about in the film. I believe if somebody tells you with a big smile on their face, hey, this house is built to code, I would run. I want the builder that looks at me and says, I've thought about what could happen down the road, so I put these thoughts in mind to make you and your family safe. That's what I want to hear.
There was a family, right? Like that. I think they rebuilt to I'm sorry if I'm not remembering this. I watched the film right after we last talked, so it's been a couple weeks. But there was a family that rebuilt, I think, to a different standard than the neighborhood required. Maybe they had rebuilt like their house was higher than everybody else's.
That was a builder.
Okay.
And he knew that water could get in his house, so he elevated his house when he was building it. So all his neighbors flooded and his house didn't. And so, when you talk about the three little pigs, that was the one you want to be, right? You want to be the one that has the brick house at the end. You want to be the one that elevated your house. And that's very smart because the code didn't necessarily call for it. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
code is the minimum. We talk about Mexico Beach here in Florida, and I keep pulling in Florida, and it could apply anywhere. But they had a Category 5 hurricane hit them. So they made the code tougher to make it tougher so you have to build safer houses. People complained so much.
Oh, they reversed it. You talked about that in
Yeah.
the film. I was shocked.
The code is lower now than it was before the Category 5 hurricane.
So is that affordability? Like, is that why people fight against this? Because it's expensive to
Yeah, they want to save money. And but here's the problem with that. Those people are going to be the first ones that are complaining when they get wiped out, and they want everybody else to pay for it. It's like if you choose to live by the beach, maybe everybody should have to sign a waiver saying I'm making a bad choice and nobody else's rates should have to go up based on my choice.
Right.
Maybe they would think twice about doing that. So
Interesting.
that's the problem. It's like, yeah, people should you have the right to live where you want. You have the right to do what you want, but we all don't have to pay for it. And that's unfortunately what happens
Yeah,
in a lot of instances. Now, the fact the code is weaker there now than it was before is insane.
that's
If they
crazy.
get hit by another Category 5, they're going to get wiped out.
Yeah. And it affects the whole community, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't just affect only the houses that can get completely destroyed, but like all of the resources of a community are impacted by that.
Yeah, I think they had a 14-foot surge of water. So even when they changed the building code, they only raised it to 4 feet, which would solve a lot of things. You know, I have in my previous film, I had a guy say, how much do you really want to bunker your community? How much do you want to spend to make your house completely bulletproof of everything? But my feeling is, okay, maybe you can't all hit that standard, but there's things that don't cost a lot more during the construction process. If you're building a concrete block house on the first floor, it's not that much more to do block on the second floor because it's not the whole house price that goes up. It's just the cost of the framing that goes up on how you're doing your house. Well, we know statistically those houses are safer, so why aren't we doing that in dangerous areas? Where you live, if you know one thing always happens and you could just do a little bit to make it safer,
Yeah.
why don't you do that? In my previous film in Moore, Oklahoma, they had 8 major tornadoes before they changed the building code. And they finally decided they agreed to change it. So that meant they put in a stronger garage door and they anchored the foundations differently so they wouldn't blow away. And the cost of doing that, a builder told me, was roughly the cost of granite countertops in the house.
Wow.
And so, but here's the thing. I said, well, if people still had a choice between granite countertops
Ah,
or the safety,
I
what
don't
would
even
they
want to think about
choose?
it. They're going to pick the granite countertops. Or
Because,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
they'd
it
still
might be
choose the granite
quartz.
countertops. So it made me think,
Quartz now, George.
if you went to buy a car and they said, yeah, hey, Julie, look at this Mercedes. It's $45,000, but if you don't get seatbelts and airbags, you can have it for 35.
Or I'll
I
give you the leather
guarantee you,
seats instead of the airbags.
I guarantee you a lot of people would choose the trimmings
Ah,
over the safety. So
so
sometimes you need
scary.
laws to help people,
That's true.
but they're going to fight it. And we
Protect
see it
ourselves from
fought all the time.
ourselves. Yeah, yeah. I had a couple other questions about the insurance aspects. One is, and I'm sorry, I can't remember, but did you talk at all in the film about public insurance adjusters?
Yes, that they're actually the Florida Association of Public Insurance Adjusters are actually a sponsor of my film.
Okay.
And a lot of people hire them to come in and give another spin at what the
Right.
damages are and then present that as a loss. And it could be a huge asset for people
Yeah.
because I think they can get up to 10%
That's how
of
they
the
get
claim.
paid, right? By a
What's that?
percentage of the claim. That's how
Yeah,
the
a
public
percentage, but it's
insurance.
not as much as an attorney. An attorney can take a third of it.
Okay.
And sometimes you need both.
Okay.
And those guys do a tremendous job because your insurance company might be overwhelmed and send out an adjuster who's new, an adjuster who just has 50 houses to see that week and is just blowing through them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you need somebody just looking out for you. And I think those guys do a tremendous job at coming in and giving it a look because they're looking for what's really wrong, not how to save money.
So I just want to be clear, and you can please correct me if my understanding of public insurance adjusters is not correct, but my understanding is that they are insurance experts that you can hire privately that get paid by a portion of the claim, but they are really there working on your behalf because they understand your policy and the industry so that you're not only being supported, I'm asking this too, you're not only being supported by the adjuster hired by the insurance company. Is that correct?
Well, they're only as good as, I guess, the job that they do, right? If they just
Yeah.
came out there and it was like having your uncle do it,
Yeah.
who's going to say, yeah, that's a $5 million thing there. Nobody's going to listen to it. They have to
Right.
turn in something that holds up to scrutiny when they come out and survey your damage and give a report. I
Right.
think although they may be working for you, I say that will be far more objective than what the insurance company is going to do. Because that adjuster who's been sent out who knows what their motivation is. A lot of times it's to come in pretty low.
Right. Right. But that's what I'm saying is say you have a claim and you hire a public insurance adjuster. Because I feel like the word public gives me the wrong idea about it. When I think public, I think it's like the government, but it's really a private contractor, right? Or company.
Well, yeah, you're hiring companies that will come out and they are working on your behalf
Hmm.
to give an actual, to give a clear-eyed estimate of what the damages are. And it can make a major difference for people because I know
Yeah.
so many people that are in that runaround with the insurance industry getting lost in the process. And this can make a major difference in you actually getting what you need to fix your house and then having the money to be able to fix it.
Right. Because related to that, this is the other thing I wanted to talk about because I think you talk about this in the film, or at least we discussed it before, this idea that we really need to understand our insurance policies. And it's overwhelming. Like those documents honestly feel like they're written so that we can't understand them some of the time. And so like, how do we do that? How do we how do we do a better job understanding our policies?
They absolutely are written so you don't understand it. And there's so many examples of little exclusions and little wording in there that undoes whatever you saw on the previous pages. And most people, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people don't have the ability to sit there and process a 56-page document
It's a lot.
of
Yeah.
boilerplate baloney that's going to make your head blow off.
Yeah.
But the agent who sold you that policy is a licensed expert that is a really good person to explain it and answer your questions.
Okay.
And you should have a lot of questions for your agent. If they look at you like, I don't know, then you need to find another agent
Yeah.
because that's an important job. And every insurance agent that I've ever met seems to care about what they do and they'll answer your questions,
I
but you've
agree.
got to have questions,
Yeah.
and it can be anything from, well, am I covered if it's a named storm? Am I covered if it's a wildfire? Do I have ordinance and law coverage? Do I have all these things in there? What are my rebuilding costs? If this happens, if that happens, maybe you could take that policy and dump it into Chat GPT and ask a bunch of questions.
That's actually a great idea. Yeah.
But I would try to have a good understanding of that document. One of the attorneys in the film told me a story about a client of his that had to sue his insurance company because his boat on a dry dock in his backyard, there was an exclusion for the kind of storm that it was if a boat's on a dry dock in a backyard, and they only paid half the value. So he had to sue the insurance company
Wow.
for that. Now I look and I see every insurance policy that I see now clearly says they don't cover sinkholes. So if you're buying in an area where there's sinkholes, you want to know that. It's like,
Right.
wow, what's my protection if something like that happens? I don't know if that's a problem in Massachusetts. It's sure a problem here.
Yeah. I don't think
And
as much.
yeah, but now people are going to ask about the foundation, right? Are people
Now
getting
people are going to ask
foundation?
about the foundation, and they should, because that's a
Yeah.
problem with we won't get into that too much here, but that is a problem with the concrete material itself that is crumbling.
Yeah.
And the only solution is to replace the entire foundation. I do want to say something about insurance agents, because I agree with you. A great insurance agent really is invaluable. We, fortunately, in our family have had an amazing insurance agent for years. And I had the experience of we owned a property out of state, and that insurance company wouldn't work in that state, so I had to have a different agent for that house. And weirdly, after 20 years of owning homes, the same year both homes had a water issue. One came from sort of like incorrect construction of where two roof lines met, and one came from a leaking toilet in the finished basement. And so at the exact same time, we were dealing with two insurance claims for the first time in our life. And we've been paying homeowners insurance for 20 years and never made a claim. And the process of dealing with those two situations was vastly different because we had different agents in different states that helped us understand the process. So I would really interview insurance agents and make sure that you have a very responsive, knowledgeable, helpful insurance agent, because I do think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and read their Google reviews, and don't just read the 5-star ones.
Yeah, read the bad.
Read the 1 and 2-star ones. And sometimes the 1-star ones are just from another agency and they hate them and
Yeah,
they're trying
somebody
to steal their
grumpy
business.
too. Yeah, but like
Yeah,
the
but
two or three, they might be like, this is, I mean, we do this like to buy a blender. I will go
yeah,
on Amazon and read the reviews, right? Like we should be doing the exact same thing for our builders, for our realtors, for our insurance agents, for
yep.
everybody.
And I love it when that person who got the bad review responds to it,
Yes.
and
Yep.
not angrily, like, oh, you were just an asshole to
But
deal with, but
thoughtfully. Yeah.
yeah, properly saying, wow, George, I'm so sorry you had this experience. That shouldn't happen. That's not who we are or how we do business. I'm going to take care of it.
Yep.
And I find that that's the way to get things done. I've had people that have had problems like at the car dealership, and the dealer says to them, yeah, I'll fix that and take care of it, but you got to give me a 5-star review or take your review down. And so sometimes reviews are manipulated, but the ones that are in the middle are usually the ones that you can get a lot of information out of. And even the bad ones, if they address it, if
Yep.
they come back with it and have a response, I think that tells you a lot about the business.
I agree. I also want to say if you're looking at builders that because there are a lot of national builders that I think it's a good idea to look at their local reviews because I have heard, just being in the real estate industry, varying, I'm not going to name names, but varying reports on certain builders that I hear in Arizona, I'm getting like rave reviews, but in Louisiana, terrible review. I'm just making this up, right? I mean, it could be any state, but those builders might have the best practices in the world, but they're also your experience is going to be affected by the building team on the ground in the location that your home is being built in. So I think it's really important to look at both.
Yeah, and you'll see, the film doesn't really come off pro builder either because I think we have contradictory goals in the building process. My goal is to have a house that I can live happily ever after in that is built to last. Their goal is to build a property and make money
Yeah.
and then go on to the next property.
Yeah.
So they're not the same thing. And a lot of times when I've gone to houses that have had problems and they had to rip the drywall out, there's beer cans in the walls, there's food wrappers, there's all kinds of garbage.
Yeah.
I always tell people drive by a house being built and see how clean the job site is. See
While
what
it's being
detail.
built.
Yeah, are they cleaning up after themselves every day? Because they are only as good as the crew that's working for them.
Yeah.
If you can find out who the subs are that work for them, does that builder have a regular team of people, or is he just picking up low bids on every job that was in that build? Is he finding the pool builder that was sitting around and had nothing to do that day that couldn't build a pool right if you gave him the map and helped him build it? You want to know how good the team is. Is the plumber somebody that's good? Are the toilets sealed right, especially on the second floor?
Yeah.
You want to go through all that stuff. And I think you have to ask a million questions. Now, I've had people get mad at me because they tell me I ask too many questions. But then they're doing you a favor if they shoo you off. They
Yeah.
go, George, you're a pain in the ass. I don't want to deal with you. I don't need a client like you. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
now I know what I need to know.
You've given me all the information I need because
Yeah.
those things are important. Who's the superintendent? What's his attention to detail? Because when you have hourly workers sometimes working on your place, they need to be supervised. That's just human nature. That's
Yep.
in any job.
Yep.
But building is so personal. This is where we live. This is where our families are. I want to know, do they do the tonnage right on the air conditioning? Did they put enough return airs in the house?
Yes.
Did they put good appliances in? Are they all grounded properly? I mean, we put so much trust in them, and I see it violated so many times. Just Google, like you say, around the country, builders. And there's some big name builders that get horrible reviews, and they're on local news stories and national news stories being sued by an entire community for the crap that they've dumped on people. And that's horrible for those people. And you wish they had been able to do more research and find out about it. Because imagine when one little thing goes wrong with your house, it throws off your day. Now imagine your house is falling apart.
Yeah.
I think that's awful for people to deal with.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And sort of back to what we were talking about in the beginning, honestly, probably nothing could replace walking through a neighborhood and talking to the people who are living in the homes built by the builder that you're considering using for your home.
Oh yeah, I wish, I've lived in places where I wish people had come by and talked to me. because a lot of times people can't talk about problems they had with a builder because they've had to sign a non-disclosure agreement so they could get their house fixed. And so
Tell,
the
wait,
builder
tell-
kind
wait, 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 hold on. Let's talk about that for a minute. So
okay,
under what circumstance, because that's kind of wild, right? Like I don't think we think about that a lot. Like,
happens all the time. And
okay,
in most states, when you sue a builder, you have to go to arbitration. You don't get to sit in front of a jury that would hang this person for the crap that they gave you. So it's an arbitrator. It's a retired judge that's sitting there and going, oh, I'll split the difference 50-50. Well, that's not justice. But to get your money from the builder, you have to sign a document that says, I will not talk about this. So the builder, in a sense, gets a mulligan. They get a do-over. And there's a lot of builders that maybe have a lot of lawsuits against them, so they close their doors and they open under a
they
new
just
name.
open a new name. Yeah.
Yeah. Pool builders do that all the time. And I've heard that happens a lot with roofers. So you really have to do your homework on all these places. And
Yeah.
by all means, if anybody's ever going to go up on your roof, ask to see their insurance before you let
they
them
fall
up
off.
there.
Yep.
Because nothing good can come from that.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that that's what you get from walking around and talking to people, because the guy or the man or woman that's not allowed to talk about it on the media or, post online certainly can tell you one-on-one.
Well,
I
he's
wouldn't
mowing
use
his
that.
lawn. He might
Yeah.
give you a little
I
more
w-
information.
I wouldn't use that builder. Here's what my hell has been. And, that's life-saving. That's invaluable information. And it's not always easy to do. As you say, somebody corporate comes in, you got 2 days to find them a house. They don't get the luxury of doing that. But if they can find a way to do it so they can have the time to do it, I think it's time well spent.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I don't want to come off as being completely anti-builder. I'm sure there are great reputable builders out there, but I think the message that I'm taking away is that we all would be better served by being more cautious and spending more time researching these things and finding out more before we make what is in many cases the biggest investment of our lives. For most people, their home is the biggest investment of their life.
Absolutely. Now, I have friends that are builders. I made friends with one guy.
You still have friends that are builders?
Yeah, surprising. This is funny, quick story. I was playing pickleball with 3 other guys, and I was mouthing off about this problem that I had and what I think of the builder. And the other guy goes, he's looking at me kind of annoyed. And I said, you're a builder, aren't you? He goes, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I've ended up using this guy for stuff. He's the most conscientious,
Oh, awesome.
attention to detail guy, that one of the most people like that I've ever met, that is so good at what he does. And there's a lot of people like that. Unfortunately, the bad people make it tough for the good people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of times,
Same in real estate, by the way.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's so many agents out there, but the track home builder ruins it, and not everybody can afford the custom home builder.
Right.
So if you're going to find the builder that builds more in your price range, you got to hunt sometimes a little harder, but that doesn't mean there's not very good people doing it.
Yeah.
It's just when there's a bad story, that's what gets all the attention. Most people don't do a story about the great house.
Right.
It's always the one falling apart.
That gets more attention. Yeah. But we do need to hear about it.
Yeah, we should.
Before we finish today, and I just want to remind everybody, I will put in the show notes a link to where you can rent the film, and I highly recommend it. I watched it with my husband. I made my husband watch it with me, but actually he was very interested to watch it with me. So we both really felt like we got a lot out of it. It is totally worth a watch. I will also have the link to the PDF, which I'm very excited about sharing because I want to be sure we leave this conversation with actionable recommendations for things that can help people figure out what next steps can they actually take so that it's not so overwhelming. Because, I know after listening to this podcast, people are going to be like, oh my God, like this is a lot. And it is a lot, but it's important.
But I want them to think that way, because then they'll do something. And my feeling is, when you look at a disaster and you go, well, wow, that wildfire just raged through there and there's nothing they could do. Well, yes, they could have been prepared in case something like that happened. They had a go box with a list of valuables that they didn't want to lose, so they took those with them. They could have had their documents prepared so they're on a quicker road to recovery because they didn't all burn down. They were in the cloud somewhere. So your first thing that you might be able to do might not have saved you from it happening, but it might improve your chances of recovery.
That's a great
And
point.
it's not a fun thing to do. Nobody on a sunny day wants to be practicing emergency evacuations, but that's the day you practice. If you have to learn something when you're panicking, you're never going to be good at it. Nobody learns how to shoot a gun or fight a fire or do anything until you practice it. You practice it. It's repetition, so it becomes second nature. Most people never do that. Have
Yeah.
you ever practiced an evacuation drill in your house? If you have a two-story house, have you ever thrown the fire ladder out the window and seen
No,
if
and I
anybody
hate
did
to say that because it's interesting that you brought that up. Well, actually, very sadly, there was a fire over Christmas in which a young woman died because she was stuck on the third floor of her house during a fire. And she's about the same age as my daughter. My daughter this week is moving into a third floor apartment. And I said, we're sending a fire ladder with you. We have several fire ladders in my house, and I am embarrassed to say I have never, they're out of the box. Everybody knows where they are, but I've never actually opened it up and put it in the window, George. I probably should do that.
Oh, you absolutely need to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you want your kids to actually have to climb out that window, but it's not a completely ridiculous idea. It can
No,
be
it's not.
dangerous, but if you don't know that you can mount it so there's even a safe chance that they could get out the window, and is it going to hit anything on the way down? Is there a roof that juts out that makes it not possible to use it? One of the stories we talk about here in Florida is people buy flood prevention devices and they never practice using them. So the storm comes and you go, I don't need it.
Like, I don't know how to use this thing.
Yeah, or you forget where you put it and you never practice setting it up. And it's like, if you're going to do these things, do them. If you're going to have a fire ladder, somebody needs to see if that fire ladder actually will get you out of the house safely, or it's a false sense of security that could get you killed.
That's
And again,
true.
that sounds dark. It sounds doom and gloom, but this isn't the kind of conversation we could have after you're dead. This is the kind of conversation we have now so you don't die.
Okay,
And
I'm going to practice the fire ladder. I'm not climbing down it, but I'll, because that
well,
scares the
but
life
what you
out of me.
can do is throw it out the window, go down to the bottom floor, have somebody upstairs so it doesn't pull out and land on your head,
Yeah.
and make sure it's strong.
Actually could hold somebody and reach the
Yeah.
place you want it to go. Yeah.
You want to so climb a little from the bottom. I mean, but just make
Yeah.
sure that, and I'm not the one to tell you the best way to test those things.
Yeah.
But I'm saying if you just buy it and stick it upstairs, it's like having a fire extinguisher, but you don't check it to see if there's any pressure in it every year. Has it been here for 10 years and it's just going to do nothing?
Yeah.
I know people that have canceled their insurance because they didn't need it one year. That's not why you have it.
Wow.
Insurance is for that day you get in an accident or something bad happens, and you have to have it for that. And it's the same with a fire ladder. It's the same with a floodgate. You got to try it out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to try it.
Don't get hurt. I don't want to tell you to climb out the window.
No, I'm
but
not.
I want you to know that it works.
Floor. I will test it from the bottom, but I'll have my husband be at the top. We'll both do that. Yeah.
Yeah, just make sure you can do it, and then you can fold it
I want
up.
to make sure I know how to use it. Like it's so crazy. I feel embarrassed to admit I've had this thing for 10 years in this house, because my house before I probably could have just jumped out the window and been fine because it was small. We're kind of high off the ground here, but I'm embarrassed to say I've never tried it. And it actually has crossed my mind. Like, would I know what the heck to do in an emergency when your adrenaline is high and you're stressed?
No, nobody can operate under those conditions. If you had to learn how to do that while your house was burning, I like tell people, if I said to you, Julie, you've got 2 minutes to grab the most important items from your house, you'd probably use those 2 minutes thinking what you might want to get, and then time is up.
Yeah.
But if you had a list that
Yeah.
said, go grab this, go grab that, take the picture of mom and dad, take the baby shoes, you know that those things are there because you practiced it. It's the same with the fire ladder. It's the same with the fire extinguisher. You got to know those things work, or there's no point in having them, because you're not going to learn when you're panicking.
Right. True. Okay. This is super practical advice. I really appreciate it. I think it's going to help a lot of people. Hopefully scare a little bit, but not be so scary that we freeze and do nothing. And
No, because I'm a homeowner. I'm just like
Yep.
you guys.
Yeah.
I make mistakes all the time, and I've had some of them come back to really cost me. So I've tried to learn from them and not make the same mistake twice. So don't freak out. Just do something.
Yeah. And you're helping a lot of people. And I admire what you've done. I think it's a great film. I think it's an important film. And thank you for getting the word out there and helping people.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of the Home After 50 podcast. If you enjoyed my conversation with George as much as I did, and you would like to watch the full version of the Built to Last film, I will include a link to where you can rent the film in the show notes, as well as a link to the free document that George is sharing with us called Questions Every Buyer Must Ask Their Builder or Seller. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks so much for listening to Home After 50. If this episode resonated, I'd love it if you'd come hang out with me on Instagram. I am at It's Juli Ford, ITSJULIFORD. Just remember, no E on Julie. That's where I share ideas and behind the scenes about multi-generational living, real estate, business, and creating a next chapter that you love. And if you're curious about whether multi-generational living might be right for you, you can grab my free guide. It's in the link right in my Instagram bio. It's a simple way to get started imagining what's next. Because after 50, home isn't just a place, it's who we're becoming. See you next time.